Welcome to the latest episode of Bandofla. In this episode, we will be touching on the tragic circumstances in Turkey and Syria over a couple of weeks ago now. And there's been growing discussion around various issues, and I'm delighted on this particular show to be joined by three really big hitters in terms of public life, in terms of our Turkish Cypriot people. We have someone all the way over from Cyprus, from North Cyprus, Mine Atli, who's the president of TDP, one of the main political parties in North Cyprus. We have Meral Hussein-Ece, who is the most senior politician in Westminster, she's Baroness in the House of Lords. And we have district and local councillor in Windham, lovely market town in Norfolk, Suzanne Nuri-Nixon. Thank you all very much for joining us on Bandofla tonight. Okay, so I think our community is really collectively feeling a massive degree of pain at the moment. The heartache and the visual kind of scenes that we're seeing almost on a daily basis, certainly initially, has been a very difficult watch. And I wanted to get just some reaction, because obviously we've got a perspective of somebody who's from Cyprus, and we've got the really awful circumstances around Tukmarov College, Minahanum, and obviously the wider reaction of Turkish people around the world, obviously the focus here being in the UK. So I think I'll start with the reaction in Cyprus, I think, Mina, if you don't mind. Obviously there was a number of schools that I think went to a volleyball tournament in eastern Turkey, and then obviously the earthquake struck. We've all got anecdotal information, but you're there on the ground. What's been the reaction of our people back home?
It has been absolutely horrific, and I can say that the atmosphere in Famagusta has completely changed. The funerals were the most difficult funerals that I've ever attended in my life, and I lost my father when I was very young. I can say that there's a lot of anger and a lot of resentment in the community. Yes, it was a natural disaster, but we know that it wasn't the actual natural disaster that killed the children. It was the fact that the structure of the building did not comply with any regulations, any rules whatsoever. And the preliminary reports have come out now. And we know that the material that was used was completely inadequate. They even found evidence of putting in slabs between the colons to prevent the actual cement from coming into the colons to save on costs. So actually, it's not the natural disaster that killed the children. It is this capitalist greed for more. And there's also some anger around the fact that there was a lot of misinformation at the beginning. I mean, the spokesperson of the leader of the community, which I say reluctantly for many other reasons, had actually announced that the children were identified initially. And it did take 18 hours for our teams to get there before they started working on the building. So, I mean, there is evidence to say that if they had got there earlier, it wouldn't have made a difference, because the building did collapse immediately, from what we've now been told. But basically, we also need to start thinking about why, and I think the international community needs to take a proactive role in that sense. Why are sports children the best actually in Cyprus? So they were going to a school called Temeka, which is like a special college. I'd say the equivalent in London would be Latima. It's a selective school, so not all students can go there. You need to get very high grades to be able to get there. And these kids were the best of those kids, the champions of the school. And we need to, I think, as Turkish Cypriot community, start to consider why our children's only opportunity for any kind of international competitions is to be in Turkey and in southeastern Turkey.
Okay, thank you, Mine, for that opening. Meral, if I can come to you next for your initial thoughts around what's happened in Turkey, and obviously northern Syria has been, greatly impacted as well. Because there is a petition circulating, and we'll come on to a couple of questions that's been posed. But your initial reactions to what's happened in Turkey.
Well, like millions of others, absolutely shocked, horrified at the extent, when I first heard in the early hours that there'd been an earthquake in Turkey. There are a lot of earthquakes in Turkey. It's quite normal, but none on this scale. And the sheer horrors, 10 cities destroyed, more or less destroyed, and the as Minna has just very eloquently outlined how these buildings just collapsed, trapping so many people, thousands and thousands of people trapped alive, many of them for days on end. It's just beyond comprehension. I know I felt physically sick and just heartbroken and compelled to watch, to see what was doing. I mean, what can we do over, in this country, hundreds of miles away, that sent help and a lot for the Turkish community in this country, in London, and particularly, and in the United Kingdom, have really rallied to send help. And we have to remember that a lot of the Turkish community and Kurdish community in the UK have got very strong links, come from that region. So they've got family. I know people I've spoken to who've lost entire families, their family members from that region. So it's very personal and it's shocking. And as the weeks have gone on, I can see it's the shock and grief is turning to anger. And then we heard about these young people in Cyprus from Famagusta, these elite, talented, wonderful young children who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Shocking that the hotel just collapsed on top of them like that, just like a pack of cards. Shouldn't have happened. Obviously with an earthquake on that scale, there would have been casualties. Of course there would be, but not on this, not the numbers that we're seeing, the shocking numbers we're seeing. I mean, and for Cyprus, a small place, and I've said to friends who don't know very well, I've said, look, Cyprus is a small place, Turkish Cypriots, small community. Famagusta is not a big place, and to lose so many children and parents and teachers from one place like that, one town, is horrific. And so it touches everybody. I'm sure that, as Mina said, the atmosphere must be really so dreadful in a town like that, but usually a vibrant town with so many young people gone. I see messages from their parents. They post messages on social media, displaying some of the grief they feel, and it's heartbreaking. It really is. It shouldn't have happened. So that's my initial reaction. But as I've been posting, I mean, I'm active on social media, and I've posted on Facebook a lot of articles that I've seen from people who are knowledgeable, who are, involved in building control, architects in Turkey, who were sidelined, who were silenced. And the anger's growing about how this happened, how this was allowed to happen, how these shoddy buildings were allowed to go up from greed and corruption. And, I found some resistance, sadly, from some members of the community over here. So sort of, not happy with me being criticising. Of course, we've got to criticise. And people say, oh, now's not the time. Now is the time. This is the time to do it. While the evidence is still fresh, well, we can still see it. It's no use doing this in 6 months' time and start asking these questions. So I'm really pleased in a way that these serious questions are being asked, and we're not, just swallowing the kind of government line, if you like, that this is just an act of God, Kismet, and what can you do? Japan has earthquakes all the time, big earthquakes, and they don't lose the number of people that have been lost, have died in Turkey. It's a common phenomena there. They've got the design in place. Should have happened in Turkey. I didn't appreciate that working people in Turkey have been paying an earthquake tax since 1999. It's the last big earthquake. Questions are being asked as to what's happened to that money. There are a lot of questions being asked, and I think, this mustn't be allowed to just be swept under the carpet. We must, raise our voices, especially since people in Cyprus as well have become so personally involved. I think all of us have a responsibility to raise these issues, very serious issues. So I remain, really upset by it, that, you know, we're carrying on leading a normal life when so many people have died. And I think we'll see the numbers going up. I think 50,000 is a very low estimate. You can't have a region with millions of people, you know, affecting millions of people, and 50,000 people are telling me it's far more than that, but we'll see.
I want to come on to the specific question around construction towards the latter part of the show, because I think that's definitely worthy of some more in-depth discussion. So Suzanne, if I can just come to you in terms of your reaction, but I think in bringing you in, there was quite a backlash. It weren't just from our community, but in response to a DJ, a Capital Radio DJ, and considering Capital Radio is one of the biggest, most prominent radio stations in the United Kingdom, and they've got a global platform as well because they go online on DAB. And one of the DJs there, who I won't name, thought it was quite funny. He was laughing when he said it. To point out, you know, now's a great time to get a cheap holiday to go to Turkey, and whilst you're there, get your teeth done. If I can get your exclusive reaction, well, it's not exclusive because it's been printed in loads of different newspapers. But you know, in all seriousness, it was about as tasteless as you can get, given what our people are going through with the suffering. But your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to listen to Capital Radio when I was a kid. You know, it was one of my favourite radio stations. But to hear that something like this had happened, I mean, he totally lack of self-awareness and the seriousness of this, and how many people this has actually touched. This one tragedy, you know. I don't have family that live in the Malsa area. Our family is predominantly, like, they were from the Paphos area, but obviously moved to the north. And yet we still have links to the children that died, the volleyball team that died out in Turkey. So for this DJ to come on and to crack this kind of joke, you're thinking, mate, you work in the media. You've got to have a little bit more self-awareness of just how serious an issue this is. And that's why I felt compelled to write. Had I known it was going to be reported in so many places, perhaps I would have been even stronger in my criticism. But he definitely, you know, didn't understand the scale of this. I have to say, when Meral said, like, you felt compelled to watch the news reports, for example, and I'm sure Mina has as well, I couldn't watch it. That's not to say I didn't, you know, not respectful or anything, but I read about it, but I could not watch the scenes, because when the reporters were talking, you know, obviously in English here, I can still hear the background rescuers in Turkish saying, and I'm understanding what they're saying. And there was one video that surfaced online, which absolutely had me crying my eyes out. And it's a bit where they've said to all the rescuers to stop talking, and with one voice they have said, "Sesimizi duyan var mı?" And they're all quiet. Have you heard our voice? So they're all quiet to see if they hear any voices, and they don't. And that had me in tears. And I thought, I can't watch the coverage because it is relentless. But I did read, you know, all the stuff going on. But we've all been touched by this, no matter what part of the world you're from. If you're a Turkish-speaking person, Kurdish-speaking person, if you're from Cyprus, you will have some reaction to this awful, awful tragedy. And there's almost no words, you know. What can you do? You feel totally helpless about it. It's heartbreaking, absolutely.
And just quickly, Suzanne, I mean, it is difficult talking about this. I'm welling up listening to you. Your council as well did a lovely gesture, which you organised. If you can quickly...
Yes, I actually asked at our district council meeting on Wednesday. And this is the most contentious meeting of the year, because it's when they talk about the council tax And unfortunately, it's a Tory-run council in our area. So, you know, this isn't a friendly meeting. But I did ask the chairman if he would be willing to hold a minute's silence before the meeting began. And he said absolutely. So at least he showed his humanity there. And we stood for a minute in silence. And it was very emotional. It just gets to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for organising that gesture. I think that's a lovely gesture. Minna, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to just from what Suzanne said about, she asked the question what we can do, and I think that's very relevant to what Ms. Ece was saying. And I'd just like to mention that there is a lot of things that the international community can do, especially people that have got a lot of followers on Twitter. I'm terrible with Twitter. I barely use it. I have recently started to get back on it for this purpose. But there's a hashtag running called İSİAS katilleri yargılansın. So it's demanding for the murderers of the İSİAS hotel victims to be prosecuted. And if you just put a hashtag İSİAS, it will come up on Twitter. And so
yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, I have
to retweet that and to get that in the, especially in the with the Cypriot diaspora, I think that would be very effective. Because a lot of the support that we've been having so far has been from Turkey, but something more diverse, I think, would make more of an impact. And the second thing is also we need to somehow evoke this sense of compassion among people that aren't predisposed to be compassionate anyway. I think the people that are in social democratic left-wing movements are compassionate people. I think that's what keeps us there in the first place. But we've seen atrocious scenes where 2 days after the earthquake, our so-called foreign minister went to Turkey to give a speech, and he referred to Greece as the spoilt child of Europe in a press statement 2 days after the earthquake, when there were Greek rescue workers trying to rescue people from under the rubble. I mean, regardless of and this is, I think, mainly towards what Ms. Ece was saying about her receiving the backlash. And we need to really underline to these people that, okay, it's not the time for us to be fighting and to be hating on each other. That I can understand. But we do need to highlight that the compassion that we're feeling and the pain that we're feeling can be superseded by these people to keep advocating for their nationalist, right-wing, hate-filled propaganda, even in times where we just don't feel up to it to reciprocate that energy.
I agree. If I can come in there, Fevzi, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
I completely agree. I hadn't seen that or heard that the Turkish Cypriot foreign minister had made such a statement. I was moved, and I think millions of people were, that the Greek president, the prime minister, was one of the first to pick up the phone to ring President Erdogan and offer his support as neighbours and friends, and they were there on the ground. And we've all seen the footage of search and rescue workers from around the world and from Greece. They were very moved. The whole country was moved. They were, I saw people fundraising on the streets of Greece, trying to, do as much as they could. Everyone's been so shocked by this. This is not the time. This is the time when the global community really came together. I mean, rescue workers from all corners of the earth came there as soon as they could. And in fact, my criticism was they got there within 14 hours of the earthquake. And an article I saw, and I think I posted it yesterday, was why were they not allowed? Some of them were being held there. As a Turkish woman who was an interpreter for, I think, the Dutch search and rescue, who'd got there within 14, 15 hours. But they weren't allowed to go and help anyone for another 40 hours. So things were going wrong in terms of the organisation right from the beginning. But certainly there should be no criticism of, they're Greek, it's Turkey. That sort of nonsense should just be ridiculed. Actually, it's just not appropriate at all at a time when people were desperate. Families. And I did watch. I mean, I know I can understand why Suzanne didn't. Certainly, I tried not to. My kids kept saying, "Mum, you've got to stop." Because I was watching footage of actual, in real time of people being saved, being rescued in the way that Suzanne has described. and pulling out, families, babies, children who've lost everybody. And there were people absolutely moved, emotional, from all over the world. I mean, I think those rescue workers will be traumatized. They said it will live with them for the rest of their lives, what they witnessed in Turkey, and the fantastic work that they did. So, this is not the time for division and rhetoric and, that sort of populism and nationalism. Now is the time that everyone needs to pull together, because a lot of things have gone wrong. There are still a lot of people, I still hear from people who haven't even got a tent. They're out exposed in the cold. I've spoken to somebody just yesterday who's from here, is going over to try and find a tent or a prefab for his elderly mother who's left on her own with nobody, or the whole entire family has been wiped out. He's the only one left, so he's had to go over there. I mean, these stories, there's thousands of these stories. So this is the time for kind of, coming together and doing what we can, not for division and stupid rhetoric. I mean, that made me quite upset, actually, to hear that, there are politicians who've got the luxury of indulging that kind of language.
Yeah, Meral, if I could just, I think it's an appropriate time to bring the point in around the petition, the UK government petition, which I think has currently got over 80,000 signatures. And the scheme, the request in the petition is for a Turkish family scheme visa for people homeless due to the earthquake to be provided. And it's a petition that was set up by Çağlar Derviş on the 9th of August. Actually, I'm not sure if that's an old one, but certainly there's over 70,000 signatures on the latest petition, and I think the latest one made reference to the Ukrainian scheme. Apologies, I think I might have referenced an older petition, but there is a call for a similar scheme to be run, and İpek Özerin from the T-Vine magazine posted a question to say, what people thought in terms of how realistic that is in terms of happening. I mean, I know what my thoughts are, and we've got a Tory government, but if ever there was a call for us to, for the government to embrace and help these people with a similar settlement scheme, it's now, isn't it?
Can I just respond to that? Because I do know I saw that and I absolutely support it. I tried last week twice to raise this as an urgent question on the floor of the House in the Lords. I wasn't successful because Ukraine is now, obviously, the anniversary of Ukraine is coming up, and that's getting far more publicity. But myself, Leyla Moran, who's our MP, who's our Foreign Affairs spokesperson, and a few other MPs, we've written to James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, calling for the sponsorship scheme, similar to the Ukraine sponsorship scheme. I've also written separately to the Foreign Minister, Lord Ahmed, who is a friend, really, in the House of Lords. He's been very supportive when I've been helping Afghan refugees to come over, and he's going to try and raise it. It is a matter for the Home Office. If they can do it for the Ukrainian family sponsorship scheme, they can do it. There are so many families in the UK who are in a very good position, who are well established, who can sponsor their own family members or even other family members. It's perfectly possible. However, as you mentioned, we have got a very right-wing Tory government who, and somebody who said to me, you do realise who the Home Secretary is, don't you? Somebody who's, been busy demonising asylum seekers and migrants.
Yep.
But now is the time for compassion. I'm going to keep raising it. I've written already, and I'm going to keep raising it. I've spoken to a lot of people who are very sympathetic on all sides of the House, actually, in all parties, who are sympathetic, who don't see why we can't do this. But of course, it needs a political will to do it. So that's why I think the Turkish and Kurdish community over in this country need, 80,000 or 70,000. That petition should have way surpassed over 100,000 now, which would then force it to be debated in Parliament. So, we've got to up our game a little bit. I think we get very complacent over here. Yeah. Some of the stuff that I post, people are not that, interested in. Yeah. After the initial shock's over, I think people need to be a bit more political and motivated. And I'm sad they're not.
Yeah, okay. We're coming to the last 10 minutes of the show, and I know this has gone by so quickly. I've got a specific question for you, Minna, but Suzanne, if you want to make a quick point on that.
No, I was just going to say what Meral was saying, about the petition. It should be over 100,000, make the Parliament debate it. But we're coming back to the same old thing that we've been in this country for how many decades, and yet we're just now trying to make inroads into the political system, and we do lag behind. And there's also the thing that maybe people don't really understand how they can get involved and how they can become active in pushing forward these kind of sort of ideas. And yeah, it should be debated, it should be discussed about, but it takes our community to do that. We have to keep pushing to get our voices heard. It comes back to voices being heard again. So yeah,
that's very fair point, Suzanne. Minna, what I wanted to ask you, I mean, it's not just relevant to our Cypriots back homes, but it's Turkish Cypriots, because I think everyone's been traumatized by the scenes of the last few weeks, the loss that we've seen. Are there any plans? I mean, my son's actually from Turkmarif. He's actually there now studying.
I was thinking of it, actually.
Yeah. So I know the impact it's had on my children because they both live in Famagusta. Is there anything at all? And I don't wish to pose it as a trick question to just have a dig at the government, because I know resources are quite scarce. But in terms of support for mental health, trauma, because this is a major trauma, seeing those mass burials.
Yeah, the psychological the Psychologists Association have been very proactive, and they have established relationships with the Ministry of Education and the government, and they have actually provided trainings to teachers on how to tackle this. So they haven't completely ignored the mental health aspect, which is a positive thing. I mean, it could have been worse. Obviously, the problems are that a lot of them were online, and the infrastructure in Northern Cyprus wasn't strong enough to accommodate that. So a lot of teachers actually missed out. But the will was there. Considering we're in the last 10 minutes, I just want to quickly touch on a few of the construction points.
Yep, we've literally got five minutes.
Okay, I agree 100% with what Mr. just said, and I feel like I have to emphasize that. Yes, there's a legal aspect of it, and if anybody wants to see how ineffective actually the legal processes are, they can look it up on the HUDOC database. I mean, we can see this is not the first time Turkey has undergone on such traumas and such events and such gross negligence. Exact same things happened in 1999, and the judgments from the ECHR relating to the trials that were conducted in Turkey in relation to the buildings that had collapsed were only published in 2015. So it took 16 years to put a final stop on the legal actions, and they weren't very effective. And we're talking about compensation sums of 30,000 euros, which is, but more than that, there are lots of aspects of the European Court which we don't have time to talk about. But as far as I'm concerned, yes, it was important for them to go through that legal stage. But what's going to save not just Turkey, not just Syria, but the rest of the world and our children and their children will be a shift in our attitudes. And this is completely political. I agree with what Ms. Ece said. We need to find ways of mobilizing people, politicizing people, and making them shift their focus onto why we're living the way that we are, rather than accepting things for fate, which is what we are so desperately encouraged to do. In Turkey, there was something administered by the AKP regime, which was called İmar Barışı, which means a construction peace, a truce, basically, with all of these people who had just built apartments in one night, for example, and they then went back and gave all of these unlawful construction licenses in one night. And that is what people are paying for with their lives right now. And it's continuing. As we're having this podcast and discussing this, buildings are being built on fault lines across Turkey as we speak. So it's going to keep reoccurring over and over again. The issue is not just an issue of people not obeying laws and regulations. It's a political issue that puts greed, puts hunger, puts money before human lives, and that is a political issue. I know people do not like the word politics. It has been, obviously, it's a very bitter word now, and people are moving away from it, but we do need to re-engage people. And I agree so strongly with what Mr. just said. Yes, it's not just about the initial reaction and crying and being upset and being distraught. It's about taking responsibility as individuals to ensure that that does not happen again.
Okay, thank you, Meral. I think this subject is definitely worthy of us revisiting, because we all feel very passionately about it, and there's lots of really good points being made. I'm going to give both Suzanne and Meral Hanım a 30-second opportunity to have some final thoughts. Meral, over to you first. Sorry, I think you're muted.
Sorry. I agree 100% with what Minez just said. I think everyone in this country who's watching or cares about this should be writing to their MP demanding that the sponsorship scheme should be supported. I know some MPs have already done that, but they're not hearing from the Turkish Cypriot community very much. I think they've got to use every tool to try and keep this on the agenda, you know, when the media's moved on to something else. And also what's happening with the families in Cyprus as well. It's not, people think it's unpatriotic. You know, I had some criticism because I dared to raise the fact that, you know, this whole the corruption and these buildings, it's not just the contractors, it's the people that gave them permission. It's the fact that laws are not being subverted. Amnesties are being given to developers for money. The whole system is corrupt, and it needs straightening out. We shouldn't be afraid to criticise, just as though we're not afraid to criticise. I mean, I'm in opposition here. I'm not afraid to criticise government here. Why should we be afraid there? It's not unpatriotic. I had criticism for saying that, saying, oh, you know, it's just the same in this country, apparently. Well, that came as a surprise to me. But in terms of being more political and more agile, we need to be able to get that petition up to way over 100, 200,000 and demand that the country, the community here is treated on an equal footing to other, to Ukrainian. We should be able to do that. There are families in this country who are well able to support, and they want to support and sponsor family members who have been left destitute with absolutely nothing. I mean, this is someone's posted it today. Imagine a combined population of New York City, Los Angeles, Paris and Rome being without homes, electricity, food or water. That's what's happening. 18 million people in Turkey and Syria are affected. We can't let this go. Yeah, no, thank you, Meral Hanım. Suzanne, last 30 seconds is yours before we wrap up.
Thank you. I will just say something that Lib Dem MP Alistair Carmichael said in the debate the other day in Parliament. He said the UK should take this opportunity to give a lead in the world and set up a scheme for those who have connections here, the same way we did for Ukrainians fleeing the war. Yes, we absolutely should do that. There are people that have nobody left. I just want to say as well, I think the reaction from the international community to go into Turkey and Syria to help has just been amazing, and it's quite humbling actually. And that's when we're at our best. But like Meral says, and Minez too, we shouldn't let this go. If there are lessons to be learnt here, and this sort of tragedy should never happen again. Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. That's a powerful note to finish on. Okay, really lovely to have Meral Hanım and Suzanne on Bandofla. I have a feeling we'll be revisiting this subject soon. My thanks to all of our guests. You've been watching Bandofla. My name is Hussein-Ece, and it's been a delight having this time with you all. Thank you.